Welcome to the Unlocking Wealth podcast. Thanks for joining us. We will motivate and inspire you as we share strategies from successful and wealthy individuals. Here is your host, David Ordonez, an entrepreneur and real estate investor.
Hello. Welcome to the Unlocking Wealth podcast. And today I'm very excited because we're going to talk about cryptocurrency and financial technology. And I have as a guest to a good friend that I actually met in Vegas a few months ago. His name is Ethan Stewart from Troika Capital. He's the co-founder of Troika Capital and co-founder of Troika Management Company. He's been investing in crypto since he was 14 years old. So welcome to the show, Ethan, and thanks for being here. We appreciate you joining us and telling us and sharing your knowledge about cryptocurrency.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, David.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, I know you started when you were 14 in high school, kind of starting getting into the space, and just tell me how did you get involved in this?
Well, I like most people who get involved this early, it's like you kind of find out from somebody who's on the edge, right? Somebody who isn't necessarily your best friend, but you still hang out with. Not acquaintance is probably the best word for it. It was actually my brother's friend, my older brother, one of two older brothers. He had been into the cipher world for quite a long time. He was really into privacy. He's a very private guy, and he was talking to my brother James about it, and I was like, whoa, free internet money, sign me up. So basically I let him hijack my parents' Windows 98 computer in our basement that they never used to start mining on crypto. And this was during the very last days in which you could mine on Windows 98. Before that machine, we would have had to switch over to Linux, but that was too much for 14-year-old me to handle. I never really understood the potential of crypto until I was in college. My sophomore year specifically, I changed my major from business administration to computer networking because I've always liked working with computers. And business administration was just a little bit too, let's say, general for me. I liked having a more specific niche.
Okay.
I'm a technical, hands-on kind of person, and getting to work with networking machines was right up my alley. And the more I learned about how the internet works and networking specifically, the more I learned that blockchain has a real potential to be kind of internet 3.0, as people call it, or Web 3, is the perfection of telecommunicating information across the internet. And the coins themselves were still kind of skeptical to me because this was 2017, and that's right when there was the big dump.
Yep.
So it didn't strike me as a way to make money, more as a way to communicate. And that's really the most important part of blockchain. A little bit more about me personally. I was born in Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, while my father was doing residency at the Mayo Clinic there. Moved around quite a bit, lived in Arizona for 4 years until I was about 5. Started first grade in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I'd lived there all throughout high school. Then went to college down the road in a town called Menominee, Wisconsin, in the University of Wisconsin system, but not in Madison.
Okay. And then you just moved to Miami a few months ago, or?
Yeah, in the beginning of September, I think is when my lease started. Yeah, just been trying to network down here.
Cool.
The mayor seems really adamant about his stance, and he says he'll take 100% of his salary in Bitcoin, so we'll see.
So now for the audience, right? Can you explain a little bit what cryptocurrency is? I know everybody, when the crypto name comes up, everybody thinks Bitcoin, right? But now there's so many cryptocurrencies. So can you explain a little bit what cryptocurrency is and fintech, right? Because that's really the space where, cryptocurrencies in a way.
Well, to put it in a single sentence, kind of a definition of cryptocurrency, I'd say cryptocurrency is a representation of the value of information on a blockchain. So essentially, it's like the dollar represents trust in the US government, the whatever coin represents the trust in that network.
Okay.
So obviously it's gained traction. I mean, it's been 2xing, or not 2xing, at least doubling every year. And it's proven that the information and the fundamentals behind blockchain is pretty robust.
And how many cryptocurrencies do you think there are now? I mean, just on the ballpark.
Last time I checked, according to coinmarketcap.com, I think it's like just under 15,000.
Wow.
And that are actively being tracked. But I mean, I've done a little bit of research into what goes into actually making one. And, theoretically, if you're a good enough programmer, you could make one in like a half an hour. But it, wouldn't be very good or useful, but it could exist, right? And there's a lot of that in the space of it could exist, therefore it does. I mean, that's kind of the theory of the Internet of Things, right?
How does these cryptocurrencies start gaining value? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, there's a very fundamental idea behind crypto, which is it is a decentralized exchange of essentially information. I mean, every coin has its own information. Every transaction is a ledger that's, infinitely growing and is more information. Every time you mine a hash, you get even more invested into the architecture of the transfer of information. And we see companies like Twitter and Facebook where it's free to use, right? And if it's free, then you're kind of the product, right? You're what's being bought and sold, and obviously the information about you has its own value regardless of you pay to sign up for the service or not.
What do you see? I mean, it's a lot of talks. Obviously, I know Biden is proposing some legislation towards regulation of cryptocurrency. So what do you see on the future of that? What do you think that's going to lead to? I mean, do you see it as a positive, as a negative thing? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, the way we run our fund is we're global macroeconomic focused. We're focused on things that will stand the test of time and no sovereign nation being able to stand in its way. Crypto is being targeted specifically, the mining is being targeted by the US government at the moment. The slice of the pie, the slice of the taxes is only half of the argument, because I mean, the total market cap of any crypto worth tracking, all of them put together, is still under 2.5 trillion. And there are companies out there that could buy all crypto if they wanted to, if people would sell it to them. But the fact that they're targeting it now is not for tax reasons. They're concerned about losing reserve currency. And that is a whole deal within itself. When I went to El Salvador, the Lightning Conference, in the introduction, they showed a chart of the history of reserve currencies and like what country held it and when. Essentially, everybody was really psyched to see the potential of the US is kind of getting towards the end of where the average amount of time spent as a reserve currency was. But a lot of people forget that most of the reserve currencies that ended up getting changed were a direct result of either a revolutionary war or a world war. And World War Part 3, Bitcoin edition, doesn't really sound like a whole lot of fun. I mean, the idea of changing the world is definitely what most people strive to do, is help other people. But the reality is the US government's not going to take the reserve currency issue lying down. And if you think about it, not many sovereign nations do. When Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71, France sent a battleship to New York and pointed its guns and said, "Give us our gold from the New York Fed or else." And they're like, "Okay, well, here you go." So it's not the first time the dollar's run into this issue, but we've still managed to be the reserve currency here in the US. So it speaks volumes to what they're willing to do to make it so.
Well, it will be a great threat to lose power, right? I mean, and that's what probably is the government behind now. Whether it's right or wrong, that's a different discussion. But now, what do you think? What that means for the investor, for somebody that wants to get into the cryptocurrency space or is learning? I mean, what do you think that means for like, for example, for your fund, right? I mean, if there's more regulation, how is that going to affect positively or negatively to your fund, your business?
To us specifically, as non-mutual fund, basically a fund that isn't, Charles Schwab or Fidelity sized, but we do have, several HNWIs who seek us. It's going to be harder for us to keep making reasons to stay in the US. But for the average investor, this is great, because places like Fidelity and Charles Schwab will start offering Bitcoin as products, and all of the legwork of making sure that the space is going to succeed is kind of offset onto trillions and trillions of dollars worth of American investments. And for the average person who doesn't need a brokerage license to trade crypto, they just need to know somebody who does, it becomes a lot easier. But for retail people like us who buy it on fundamentals, we're going to have to go a lot more into the global part of the global macro strategy.
Okay. So this regulation probably will lead to a lot of investors that are probably right now sitting on the sidelines because it's not regulated. They might be scared, afraid. Now the big Charles Schwab, Fidelity are going to start offering now Bitcoin. So now they feel more comfortable, and there's a lot of more investors coming into the space who probably will drive Bitcoin and price of other cryptocurrencies probably, because do you see a big demand if that happens from other type of investors, or if investors are not doing it right now just because they feel it's unregulated and they might not feel safe, in a way?
I feel the people who are making the argument that they don't do it because it's unregulated are the people who are going to benefit the most from regulation. But I think that kind of defeats the purpose of crypto. I mean, at that point, you're looking at it purely as an investment rather than as really a tool. And there are many blockchains out there that, don't have a whole lot of capital, but that do some great things. I mean, Ethereum eventually will have such high fees that people will move away from it, and that's when things like DeFi will step in. And I know they do different things. The decentralized finance versus application purposes that Ethereum has are different, but when you're looking at it purely as an investment, you lose the potential of creativity and just use cases of the blockchain of itself when you just turn it into a security.
Tell us a little more about the fund. I mean, I know you have a fund, or you're launching a fund, which is, and the management company is Troika Management Company. You're a co-founder of the fund. So the idea of the fund obviously is to raise money so you can invest on cryptocurrencies. That's the main focus of the fund, Ethan.
Yeah, that's when the fund is when I kind of separate myself from the nerd that loves the idea of blockchain to, the 2 years I spent studying business, where I understand at the end of the day, dollar means power, and losing power to the dollar is losing your foothold within the overall economy. So our idea is we don't trade based on sentiment, and we don't trade based on technical analysis either. I mean, we have risk assessors, but we don't we don't trade on the idea of patterns and graphs, I should say, and we trade on the idea that crypto is being taken seriously by federal governments. Sovereign nations are deciding to get on or get off the ship, as it were. I mean, look at China and El Salvador.
El Salvador, yeah, I was going to mention El Salvador.
Yeah, El Salvador's fully on board and China's fully off board, and you see that regardless of how much money is in it, the governments of the world are taking the problem very seriously. So we have to follow kind of the global macro strategy that the governments do and decide where to make our bed.
What do you think is going to take? Do you think that's going to divide the world in a way, in terms of governments and nations taking on 100% on crypto, and nations saying no, we're not being part of it? What are your thoughts on that?
Without getting too far into predictions, I do think every country will have an affirmative yes or no, and the real issue is that governments are known to change their mind, especially China. But places like Iran, like they outlawed mining for so long, and then the old turnaround. Now the Iran central bank has been working on putting out their own cryptocurrency for their monetary system. So clearly it's not an issue of does crypto work, it's a issue of can we control it.
Control it, exactly. Yeah. Now, tell us a little bit about fintech. Is only cryptocurrency part of fintech, or there's a lot of other applications? And for our audience, fintech means financial technology, and that's the space that we're addressing here. So, what other applications do you see on fintech? And explain a little bit what fintech is.
Well, for me personally, I think fintech is kind of a minor version of .com boom. I think it's really overinflated at the moment by SPACs, or special acquisition companies, whose idea is to just give somebody a bunch of money to IPO and then make profit off of selling shares from early investment. But the word fintech itself is kind of being overblown. It's a really nice way for a lot of people in crypto to say I do crypto without saying I do crypto, and that's for the sanity of the banks, because some banks are starting to offer using Bitcoin as collateral, but not a lot are really into it. I know our banker relationships, they're willing to deal with us just because of how we present ourselves and how we've performed in the past. They can see our metrics, but they never think to themselves, I would take this for a down payment on a house.
Now, do you think it will change if it becomes regulated? And do you think that would happen, that I can actually pay a down payment on my house with Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency?
Yeah, probably eventually, especially if it gets regulated. If it gets regulated as a security, it's going to be a little bit trickier, just because technically you would have to work through a broker, which would require a Series 65 license, which is not fun to get, from what I've been told.
And I'm sure a lot of these brokers are lobbying for that, right?
Of course. A lot of places that do any kind of finance, let alone in the technology sector of finance, they have the sort of code, right, where you don't know what I know because I have this piece of paper that says so. Our company does have a Series 65 in our office, so we're prepared for that contingency, but we don't want it to come to that, because then you lose the decentralization factor, and you can't stop the blockchain from functioning. Essentially, if it wanted to go on and have transactions, they would just be illegal transactions, but they would still occur. it might get to the point where it's like speeding. It's like, well, if you only do it so much, then we're not going to do anything about it. Dodging your taxes. If you don't make that much money, they're just going to send you a bunch of letters and you can ignore it and you'll be fine, right? So it's the regulation is only if you make them mad.
Of course, of course. Now going back to fintech, I was reading an article where there's so many applications now, alternative applications like alternative credit scoring, insurance underwriting, transaction delivery, peer-to-peer lending. You know, there's so many new applications and solutions on the financial world through the new technology, right? I mean, how do you see that, you know, becoming like, hey, tomorrow we might have two different credit agencies, you know, that are completely separate from the three traditional ones, and they're gonna, you know, there's so many changes going on. Is, you know, what do you see on that space?
I see that becoming more beneficial for the taxpayer. I think the more the federal government is in control, the more they're kind of comfortable with letting you do what you want, if that makes sense. Kind of like the when your parents tell you, you know, be home by midnight, they don't mean you can't do anything. They just mean be home by midnight, right? So you got to meet the one requirement. I think the world kind of has a misconception of how credit scoring really affects what you can do. I mean, if you look at the people who are billionaires and billions, they always just have terrible credit and they're always in massive amounts of debt. And you're like, well, how can that be? It's because they have good cash flow and they can pay off their debts whenever somebody comes to collect, regardless of whether or not they have more. And so the country that has, I think last week they just, the US government passed $29 trillion worth of debt. That one is also responsible for telling you how good your credit is. I mean, the system is it's a little bit skewed towards just give me the money and I'll give you what you need. I mean, that's kind of how it's always been, but the more sovereignty crypto gains, the easier it is to create that cash flow and have maybe a more realistic look at your own credit score rather than, you know, thinking it has to be great. Just know you have to have cash flow.
Correct. Now that is to another question I had, because, you know, I'm more into the real estate space, and I invest heavily in real estate, multifamilies, single family rentals, and for me the most important thing is cash flow, right? So if the asset depreciates over time, as long as I'm getting the cash flow from that rental property, I'm paying off the mortgage, and I can, you know, weather the storm if prices will decline, right? How does an investor can assess and minimize risk when they're buying cryptocurrency? Because obviously you're not buying a tangible asset. So how can a new investor that is learning cryptocurrency and says, you know, I want to start investing or trading on cryptocurrency, what would you tell them how to analyze or be cautious, or what things to look after to make sure that they're minimizing that risk?
I think the greatest issue facing an individual investor is probably themselves. They have to look at themselves and think of how they think and invest, right? If they're the type of person to buy and sell the news, then perhaps you should just take a long-term strategy, pick like 2 or 3 of the large cap things and just, you know, turn off the news, right? And if they're a type of person who likes to talk to other people, there are plenty of Telegram groups, Facebook groups, and such that will help you out with that. As far as just getting started investing in general, the most important thing to remember in cryptos is it always changes. There, with the exception of Bitcoin, but I mean that is only because it's the one that's been around the longest. Eventually, we will find a crypto to surpass it. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but the technology is just starting out. So,
how do you keep yourself updated and in the game, right? I mean, you're so knowledgeable about cryptocurrency and this space. How do you feed yourself, or how do you maintain yourself so knowledgeable about this? What do you feed your news, and what do you look at?
on a day-to-day basis, I just kind of read as much news about crypto as I possibly can. I try to stay outside of groups that are trying to pump certain altcoins or networks that are historically opposed to crypto, or networks that are historically entirely bullish on crypto. I mean, the think tank is real on both sides. So on Twitter is where I do most of my research, not because I take influencers' word as the 100% truth, but because it's good to know what other people are thinking, even if they're thinking it incorrectly or if they're thinking it single-mindedly.
It gives you another perspective, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, as far as research goes, me and the risk assessors kind of just pick out a few coins that we've done individual research on, and then we look at its history. One of the largest and most important parts about a successful crypto is the team that creates it. Obviously, Satoshi Nakamoto is still unknown to this day, but Ethereum's original team has gone off to do plenty of projects. I mean, Charles Hoskinson was on the Ethereum team for a while, and then he ended up creating ADA, and ADA was very successful. So the creators, it is a software at the end, and it has to be useful, and the creators are a very important part of it.
That's great information for somebody that wants to start getting into the space and learning, understanding how crypto works and what's behind it, and what strategies to take. Any mentor in your life that kind of help you to get into this space? Anybody that is being critical on your career so far?
I've never had a crypto specific mentor, but I've had plenty of mentors in my life. My brother James, that I mentioned earlier, he actually has his own Series 65, and he's been trading on a fundamental basis of stocks for a while. So he kind of showed me what fundamental things matter and what don't. And essentially he said, only buy and sell the news if said product buys and sells the news, and just look at what the federal government has to say and assume they're going to do the opposite.
I love that. That's great. That's great. All right. What do you think is the importance of having a mentor in any activity, right? Because we're talking about unlocking wealth, and there's many ways to unlock wealth right now. You're in the cryptocurrency space. I'm in the real estate. What do you what's the importance of having a mentor to guide you through the process?
Well, I think having a mentor kind of is a really human element. I mean, we are group creatures, we are communal, and seeing success, not only does it show you how to do it, but it gives you the confidence that this can really happen. I think the most important thing to look for in a mentor is someone who kind of is releasing their ego. If you have somebody who is more like, look at my Lamborghini, rather than let's go, do some real hard research and get some alpha, then you probably have the wrong kind of mentor. Just because they are successful doesn't mean that they're a good teacher.
That's key.
The
That's
people who
key.
are a good teacher are the ones who are willing to make mistakes, because that means they've probably learned the most themselves.
That's key what you say, because we see, especially now, a lot of mentors or wannabe mentors in social media showing off their Ferraris and their Lambos, and they're claiming to be successful in whatever space. And I agree with you. They're just probably just filling their ego and creating a personal brand instead of really sharing what they know. That leads me to the next question. Now that you said mistakes, and I'm a big fan of mistakes, and because that's how we learn. Um, what's the biggest mistake you've made? I mean, in this arena, in this space.
Probably the largest mistake I've ever made is spending too much time trying to find long shots. For a while there, when we first started, Troika Management started before Troika Capital, and that's when we were just kind of teaching ourselves how to do things. I mean, just how to run a business at all. And that time we were just deciding how to make our strategies before we started opening up to investors. And during that time, it was always like, oh, Bitcoin's up 2%. That's so boring. This random cryptocurrency is up 500%. And I spent probably way too much time trying to find, the next to the moon, for lack of a better term, cryptocurrency. And eventually I realized that it's good to have a little bit of that, because it keeps you curious and sometimes does lead to real winners. But making your fundamental time spent about finding the moonshots it was a huge waste of time, and I could have been doing more research on things that are already a little bit successful, but will probably be more successful rather than 0 to 100.
And I think sometimes we overanalyze and we overthink it, right? I mean, that's one of the big mistakes that I've experienced too. Sometimes you get caught up on the analysis paralysis, right? And then you're just overthinking things. So yeah, that's a great lesson to learn, and kind of focus and put your time to where it's going to be the most effective, right? What's the next big step for you and for Troika Management Company and Troika Capital? What's the next big step?
I kind of alluded to it a little bit in when we were talking about regulation, but probably just establishing international footholds is going to be most important. This regulation space changes every day, especially in the US. And just having the ability to tell the investor that if we need to jump ship, we can, and we don't even need a lifeboat. We'll just hop onto the other one, which would be our ideal situation, is we can just move it around as needed.
What do you see? What do you see most of the European countries standing on this?
There's a lot of things going on in Europe currently that are very divisive. I see the countries that are generally more sovereign, such as France, embracing it rather quickly. France is trying to make their own CBDC, or central bank digital currency, very quickly. And France is also enormously independent with the energy issue that's going on. They're going to have issues getting natural gas because they have to get it from Russia, and we all know Russia likes to kind of point and laugh when they're in a position of power. But France has a lot of nuclear power, so they're going to be just fine. And so the forward-thinking sovereignty that France has generally will probably lead to them having the most ability to control, I guess, the market, because they've done a little bit more acceptance. Places like the UK that are imposing more and more stringent rules against cryptos are probably going to see those who are serious about crypto leave. They do have quite a bit of activity on the individual level. From what I've heard, Monero, which is a privacy coin, is very popular in the UK just because it does avoid a lot of the stringent rules that the UK imposes on cryptocurrencies. And then other places like Poland, where they don't have much other than industry, they're definitely going to be seeing the opportunity to, like El Salvador did, to create their own kind of wealth and independence from those around them.
Being on top of what's going on in the regulation in every of these, in each country, is going to give you obviously the opportunity for you and for the fund and for your company. What do you think are the top 3 cryptocurrencies to keep an eye on them as an investor? And then just like, hey, I want to start investing on crypto. I mean, I want to start learning more. I mean, what tip can you give them in terms of like what 3 top would you keep an eye
on? My favorite one that I think has big potential right now is probably Ocean Protocol. Ocean Protocol is a Web3 coin, and without getting too technical, essentially it allows for relatively instantaneous transference of data. They've been backed by IBM, so they have quite a bit of the team, as I was talking about, is most important. I think, I mean, this isn't really a surprise, but I think Ethereum is probably my number 2. I like Ethereum just because it might be the second cryptocurrency, but it is the first one to offer smart contracts, and smart contracts really are the future of crypto and how the individual interacts with it. I mean, all of the NFTs are either traded on Ethereum or some of them are traded on Binance Smart Chain. But
that's a great thing that you brought up. What are the NFTs? Explain what's an NFT. That way the audience can understand what's that. Because I've heard so much, and I actually just learned it with you a few months ago when we went out to dinner here in Vegas. So explain us what's an NFT, how he becomes valuable too.
So an NFT stands for non-fungible token, and essentially what that means is it can't be divided into smaller versions of itself or moved without selling the whole thing. And NFTs have insane potential for what they can offer, because the idea of a bit of information, I'll give a little bit more of a definition. NFTs kind of provide a unique ownership of whatever it represents, right? It could be a picture of an ape, which is really popular. It could be a GIF of Kanye West, or whatever, but it could also be like personal medical records, and
it could be a ticket of a concert that I went, right? And it's represented in an NFT. And if that concert becomes, let's say, I don't know, the artist passes away, now it becomes more valuable because there's no way that nobody can else go again to that concert, right? I mean, that kind of that concept in a way. It could be.
Yeah. A lot of them are collectibles, and definitely the largest market for NFTs right now is collectibles. But the use cases it could have just as a technology, as a individual piece of information that is encrypted, is very valuable. Like I said before, it could be medical records. Imagine if all of the Mayo clinics in the world were on the same blockchain for NFTs. You could instantly have all of your medical records transferred instantly without having to do anything. You walk up to the counter where they ask you to show them your insurance and all that, and if you just scan the QR code to your NFT of your personal medical records, you have it all instantly and you get care a lot quicker. So the potential is limitless, and unfortunately right now it's being used for JPEGs of apes. So.
But the application itself can be so useful not only for medical records, but for all type of records. Passports, birth certificates. I mean, you name it. I mean, the applications can be, like you said, limitless.
Exactly.
Most of the NFTs right now are traded under the Ethereum currency. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
Most of them.
So that's what makes Ethereum such an interesting currency.
Yeah, it has the possibility of being a smart contract for that purpose. Now, I mean, a lot of other blockchains that do smart contracts that can do NFTs. It's just Ethereum's the most popular.
Is the most popular.
Yeah.
We're missing the number 3, Ethan. So Ocean Protocol, Ethereum, and the number 3.
I really like Pancakeswap.
Okay.
Pancakeswap is a DeFi currency on Binance Smart Chain. I like Pancakeswap because I think that coin swapping and farming and yielding, the more people start to realize that they're going to buy cryptos and not sell them immediately, the more pools and farms will become popular. And I just like Pancakeswap because Binance has just been very successful. I mean, Binance Coin itself, which is the main currency that Pancakeswap will trade for, is gone up quite a bit in just the last year, and 2020 as well.
What are your thoughts on Solana?
So Solana, for me, I haven't done enough research to say a yes or no, but I do like the way it looks. The idea of Solana is, I wouldn't say it's lost on me. I just, at some point, there are so many things that it becomes redundant, right? And Solana is clearly a winner, but it comes from a pool that do the same thing.
Okay.
So.
Perfect. Awesome. So now we got some tips from you, Ethan. What are the 3 top books that you recommend, and not necessarily or specifically, because I have some books that have nothing to do with real estate, right? But they're just made a huge impact when I read them. What are the 3 that you recommend? Must reads.
Yeah. So my 3 books are. Number 1 is Hero Living by Rudy Reyes.
Okay.
If anybody is a fan of the show Generation Kill on HBO, okay. One of the Marines, he actually played himself in that show, if I remember correctly. He wrote a book on his life from growing up homeless with his brothers to a single mom, and then living in different homes for a while, and how his journey took him to realize that even when things are at their worst, your mentality can change everything. And he became a Marine and a TV actor and a well-published author. So number 2, this one does kind of relate. It's called Misbehaving by Richard H. Thaler.
Okay.
He is a behavioral scientist, and he focuses mostly on the behavior of how people invest. This is, if I could recommend one book for somebody who wants to read about investing, I would recommend this, because I mean, it might not touch on fundamentals or really the nitty-gritty of how to trade, but it does touch on the psychological effect of money on people, which is pretty important.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then number 3 is, it's probably my favorite fiction book. It's The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway.
Okay.
It's a classic, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's just a story about grit and determination. And I mean, it's not terribly profound for me to say this, but the old man kind of represents the human spirit, and the sea represents the ever-changing and unforgiving world that we live in. And my father read this book to me when I was, I don't know, probably like 12 or 13, and it really showed me that even if you're, having to beat off a shark with the paddle of your boat, it could be worse.
That's a great book. I mean, I see. I always say that mentality and attitude is 90% of really what happens to you, and just 10% is really just the mechanicals of it, right? I mean, the mind, the power of your mindset is so powerful to everything that you do, and it seems that you agree with that, right? I mean, your mindset has to be there. And there's another book that I love and I always say this: obstacle is the way, and basically it goes back to Hero Living, or or the Old Man and the Sea. The obstacle is so. The perspective of that obstacle can be seen as, well, this is where it stops for me and I'm done, or how I can use this obstacle as a step for me to succeed in whatever you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when it boils down to the meanings of the books, it's the greatest obstacle is yourself. I mean, the past is out of control, the future is out of control, and in fact, both of those don't exist, because as soon as the future is now, it is now the past, now that I've said it, and the now and your mentality in the moment is the most important part of yourself.
That's key. That's key. I like that about the past and the future, and all you have is now. And that goes to, there's regardless of your religion, there's a prayer. It's called the Serenity Prayer, which is help me to change the things that I can, accept the things that I cannot change, and just the wisdom to know the difference, right? So that basically is the difference. Is this is the present. I can't change the past or the future, and just I'm here. That's the Serenity Prayer, and I love that because it just keeps you grounded and it gives you a different perspective when you come against obstacles, man. Because we talk a lot about unlocking wealth and how to become successful, and some of the skills needed or the mindset needed. But along the way, there's so many frustrations and there's so many mistakes, and that's how do you keep yourself motivated every day? I mean, how do you wake up in the morning and like, let's do this again, right? Because not every day is like that, and we know that. So what do you do? What tools do you use?
For me, I keep a number of journals. One of the journals is a gratitude journal, and basically every day I write one thing I'm happy for about today, or as many things. It's usually just one thing if I'm kind of blowing through it, which I shouldn't be, but sometimes I do. One thing I'm happy about today, and one thing I'm happy about in my life in general. And it's just good to keep in mind that we as investors, you and I, we have tickets to the greatest show on earth, right? All of the big moves and all of the excitement in the world can be traced back to following the money. And if I could give a single piece of advice to the listeners, the number one thing is get a ticket. Whatever you decide to do, be it real estate, be it crypto, having some form of sovereign control is the ticket that you want.
Yeah, that's key. I love what you just said right now. Get the ticket. Yeah. Well, last question for you, Ethan. What are the top 2 attributes or skills that you would, and I know we need a lot of them, right? And we work in a lot of our skills to improve. But if you got to choose 2 in order to unlock wealth and potential in your life, what are the top 2 that you would name?
Number 1 skill, probably mentality, going back to it. And mentality doesn't mean have everything planned out, but it means have a plan. The phrase is plan for the worst, hope for the best, and it's a little cliche, but cliches are still drawn from truth. And it's really important to have a plan and believe in it, and know that if it goes awry, that you can still do it. If anybody says they're not winging it, then I guess they must have a crystal ball, because even the best laid plans fall apart. And men having the right mentality of wherever you are in your steps of your plan, that you will keep going with it, keep following and believing. And number two is knowing yourself. If you're the type of person who would put all of their life savings into Dogecoin, then perhaps you need to do some self-reflection before you put all of your life savings into one single thing. Knowing yourself means creating habits of good trades, creating habits of when you're going to do it and when you're not going to do it. I mean, for a while there, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to look at charts, because at 5 a.m. in Central Time, was back when I was in Wisconsin, is usually when Chinese traders would get done with work and go home, and you'd see the Bitcoin market have one of its larger fluctuations. And I think probably less than 1% of the time I would actually end up making a trade on that. I would just kind of watch it biting my nails. I said to myself, I'm not going to trade at 5 a.m. I'm going to know myself and know my habits and create good trading habits, which is don't just stare at the
screen.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's knowing yourself is a process that never ends, right? We're learning and knowing ourselves every single. I think it comes with maturity, with age, and it never stops. Well, that's great information. Thank you for sharing those. Just wanted to share one big news going back to the cryptocurrencies. A Staples Center in LA is becoming now Crypto.com arena. That's huge. I mean, I think, cryptocurrency getting into sports and sponsorships now is, the actual figure hasn't been shared, but they say it's about $700 million name rights deal, the biggest one so far done. So that's huge.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people look at how to create adoption in the wrong way. They think, well, if we have a Bitcoin conference and we make it really fun, like we bring in Tony Hawk, that will get their attention. When in reality, it's you really kind of gotta force it. I mean, adoption isn't adoption. Adoption, the word sounds like it's voluntary, whereas you really kind of just gotta force it. The way that investments work is most people, they go to college, pay off their debt, save a little money, invest, and then retire, and they never were forced to do anything. So you thinking that they're just going to adopt a completely different lifestyle based off of higher risk is probably very low. But if you're like, every time LeBron James hits a really sweet dunk, it's the announcer comes over the Crypto.com stadium and says, LeBron James dunk brought to you by Bitcoin, maybe people will start to notice.
I agree. Yeah. Well, it's a huge thing in LA, obviously, and I think it's gonna set a precedent to what cryptocurrency is becoming part of our daily lives. Well, thank you so much, Ethan, to join us and share all your thoughts, opinions, and knowledge about cryptocurrency and this space, which is still unknown for many people. I think it's been a great interview. If people would like to learn more about your fund and learn more, get more information on your fund and cryptocurrency and everything that we talk about, how can they contact you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Don't worry, my messages are open. You don't need a premium account if you want to talk to me. You can also find me on Twitter at Scotland's Hun. I don't really post a whole bunch, but I do answer DMs quite a bit. So if you DM me on Twitter, I'll get back to you.
Great, perfect. So audience, if you want to get in touch with Ethan, learn a little bit about what he's doing on his fund and the investments on cryptocurrency, please look him up on Twitter and LinkedIn. Well, once again, thank you, Ethan. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for being part of this podcast. And we'll definitely be seeing each other soon again. Good luck in everything you do, all these new projects, and we'll be in touch, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much, David. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, man. Have a good one.
All right. You as well.